So today I want to talk about triggers, what they are, how we often try to address them ineffectively, and then something that you can do which will ultimately lessen the impact that they have on you. So, first, triggers are something that anybody who's ever been through any kind of traumatic experience will recognize. Even if not by name, you know it when you feel it. Triggers basically are when you are responding to something from your past rather than what's going on in your present. And triggers can be felt sort of emotionally, mentally. An example of that would be if you're in a conversation with somebody and just an innocuous conversation and they say something or a specific tone or topic really sets you off and you find that you're overreacting to what they say. That's a trigger. Triggers can also be felt more in the body. There's times where emotionally you might be completely fine with it, at least on a conscious level, but you're feeling a heaviness, maybe an anxiety, sometimes even nausea. So there's a lot of trauma that can be stored in the body, and that can be triggered or initiated by different experiences. Triggering often leads you to a feeling of being flooded, being completely overwhelmed, and it leaves you often thinking and behaving in sort of an irrational manner. And you're often not even able to realize that you've been triggered until after that initial intensity has faded. Also, triggers exist in sort of two different categories. Some triggers are anticipated ones. For example, if you have a significant anniversary approaching, well, you know that that's coming up. Other triggers, though, happen by surprise. So, that example of being in a conversation with somebody and they happen to say something that sets you off, well, you can't always see that coming. So, to illustrate a common way that we all tend to deal with triggers, I'm going to tell you a little story. So, during my divorce, I was living with a friend, and I still was working at a school that was quite close to my old neighborhood. And at that point, I had to get a P.O. box to get all the, well, let's be honest, bills and information from the IRS. And that post office box happened to be very close to my old home and the school where I was working. So my routine was that every day after school, I would go by that P.O. box, which was a stressful situation on its own because I never knew what was going to come. But I actually inadvertently made it even more stressful. So the more direct route would have been to drive by my old neighborhood and then take a turn onto the street where the post office was located. But I refused to go by my old neighborhood. In fact, my old neighborhood scared me. Every time I did end up near it, I would feel heart palpitations and this sense of dread, this overwhelming dread would come over me. So instead of taking the direct route, every time I would go to that post office after work, I would drive this long, winding route and probably add about 30 minutes onto that short little drive just to try to avoid seeing my old neighborhood. So, in this example, obviously, seeing my old neighborhood was a trigger for me. It caused me to respond in an emotional way, and it didn't feel good. So my inclination was to avoid it. In fact, I went to some pretty interesting gymnastics there to attempt to avoid it. But here's the thing. By avoiding that neighborhood, what it was actually doing was giving it even more power over me. So to give you another example of how you can approach triggers more effectively, I'm going to use a story about Cash here. So we adopted Cash several months ago, and it's hard to tell from him now, but he was pretty excitable. And there's one situation that really stands out in my mind. We had literally just driven home with him, and we hadn't even brought him in the house yet. And my husband and I were walking him around the neighborhood, and we came across a couple neighbor dogs who were in their front yard, unleashed, and were really barking quite a bit. And at that point, Cash was drawn to that sort of chaotic energy. And so Cash, the first time we walked by, did not respond appropriately. And my inclination, since I can tend towards anxiety, my inclination is, oh no, let's get this puppy out of this situation. Whereas my husband's response, which I love and I'm still learning from, my husband's response was, oh, awesome. This is an amazing opportunity for us to teach Cash how to respond. And so that day we actually walked back and forth past those barking dogs several times. And, with each time, a couple things were happening. One, my husband was slowly teaching Cash how to respond. And then two, Cash started to learn that, hey, these dogs are noisy. They're barking. It sounds bad. But you know what? Those dogs never left their yard. They never came after him. And so he started to become more confident with it. And he learned how to respond. And in that situation, that something that was a trigger for him, those excited barking dogs, became just kind of extra noise. And this guy now, I'm proud to say, I can take him anywhere and expose him to any kind of excitement, and it doesn't bother him at all. So that's just another way that you can think about triggers. Triggers are nothing but an opportunity for you to learn how to respond differently. So what I challenge you to do, instead of looking at triggers as this big, scary, bad thing that you need to avoid, instead get excited when you see them, because it's like, oh boy, yeah, this might be a tough lesson, but this is a time for me to learn how to handle this better, so that this time when you start going forward and you're exposed to it again, it no longer matters. Thank you, Cash, for the lesson.